conquered. System control achieved. Planetary control achieved. Planetary control achieved.
Custom Galactic Conquest is a new mode released in Thrawn's Revenge 3.4 and as a submod for Fall of the Republic. It began as a way to pick your starting planet from the ground up, but it has since spiraled out of control into a huge range of ways to set up the game. There's a lot to figure out before you can use all those options, so I've created this video to walk through how it works. The first thing to do is select a map layout from this pop-up. There's the option to use your factions from the ground up layout, and 3 maps that cover the full galaxy in different sizes. The layout of the map isn't very important to the rest of the scripts, so it's pretty easy to change if you know a little bit about XML. Once you've got the map loaded, you'll be presented with 4 choices. How much direct control versus procedural generation you want for the spawn locations, if you want to make any tech changes, how much territory and heroes factions should start with, and if you want your factions to start with more or less territory than the AI. Then find the starter dummy with the play button icon. You use this to mark your main planet that's going to spawn your faction capital and be the starting point for any generated territory. The location of these faction dummies will control if they are spawned as enemies. If you've forgotten the pop-up options you chose, you can review them on the top right. When you're ready, use the starter dummy to conquer a planet and finalize the setup. As you just saw, in random enemy location mode, the enemies in the same location as your starter dummy will be spawned. Sell or move the factions you don't want to fight, and you can do this with as many or as few as you like, including picking no enemies if you want a relaxed game where you don't need to worry about being attacked. Random dummies will select a faction you didn't pick already. Each enemy will spawn with the main planet at least 5 jumps away from your starting planet, though the rest of their territory may generate a bit closer than that. On the other hand, pick enemy location will spawn the main enemy planets where you leave the dummies. Put factions you don't want to spawn with your starter dummy. You can still place any combination of enemies, including randomly picked ones. Skipping to how much territory to spawn, from the ground up mimics that Galactic Conquest, giving you a single planet with no starting heroes. Enemies will have either a set of 4 connected planets, or a set of 3 and a set of 2 somewhere else. Small Start gives all players 5 planets connected to their main planet, and a few important heroes for the faction covering different roles. The set of heroes is affected by starting area in some cases. In Full Start, connected planets will be added to every faction until the whole map is almost covered. For heroes, it will spawn the same set you would get in a progressive of the selected era. Empire at War isn't perfect at repeatedly finding bordering planets, so it will fill in some planets at the end to keep the factions equal without checking connectivity. That's how you get these isolated planets here. Placing 3 factions will give you just under a third of the galaxy, 4 just under a quarter, and so on. In addition to looking pretty cool, the delay between spawning planets actually helps the game find better connections. As you generate more factions, you'll tend to get more of those isolated planets. The end result is usually workable, but you can always try again if it's not quite what you were hoping for. If you're not doing from the ground up style territory or pick everywhere mode, there's another choice where you can tweak your own territory relative to what the AI gets. You can leave things equal, or give yourself some extra planets if you want an easier game, or a bit fewer for more challenge. If you want a lot more challenge, you can also pick to have a single planet while leaving the AI owning most of the galaxy. Territory changes were mostly intended for the full starts, but they also work the same way for small starts. If you pick a single planet small start, it's going to be extremely similar to From the Ground Up, except that it has starting heroes, if that's something that interests you. If all that isn't enough control for you, there's also the Pick Everywhere mode. Here, you're given a large set of dummies for each faction, including your own, that you use to set the owner of individual planets. Besides the fine-tuning of planet ownership, you can choose from the ground up, or small or full start, to set what heroes will spawn. Since there's no main planet for the AI in this case, there's a capital dummy type you can place alongside a faction dummy to spawn a capital at that planet. If you want to handicap an AI faction, you don't have to place any capital for them, though the starter dummy will always give you one. Conversely, you can put multiple capitals on different planets owned by the same faction to give them a powerful defensive building, plus a larger unit spawn on that world, and extra starting credits. With enough patience, you can lay out almost any way that planets can be owned. There's also the option to make changes to the units you can build. If you're happy not worrying about this, standard roster skips the upcoming complexity and is what you've been seeing videos of before this. Roster Editions spawns in a copy of every unit that would start disabled, but can be enabled as a normal unit, whether that's from researches, other eras, government mechanics, special units for historical GCs, and so on. Move any combination of these units to your starter dummy to enable them when you choose a planet. And there you can see the units you've chosen are enabled for you to build. You'll get these messages when units can only be built on a certain planet. The units will only spawn in for the setup phase if that planet is on the map, but other than that, they work the same way. Don't mind the Super Star Destroyer over there, that's just telling you what choice you picked earlier. And here you can see they are enabled, but only on one planet, not so much on its neighbor over here. Custom roster is similar, but also spawns in your normal roster and disables units that aren't moved to the starter dummy. This does mean that you can end up not being able to build units, but maybe you were looking for a challenge, or you have the right influence units to rely on. If you do remember to select units, you can replace parts of your normal roster with the additions, or leave gaps to force a more reasonable challenge than no units at all. Rather than moving them, you can also sell units to leave their availability unchanged. Empire at War's user interface doesn't like having too many unit types in the same fleet, which is why the units are split into two stacks. If you're wondering why space gunships are with the ground units, It's because squadrons behave more like companies than units without a container for spawning purposes. This doesn't tie into more complex mechanics, so completing research or government actions might undo your roster setup. That's especially true for ship markets, and those units won't even be spawned in for the setup phase. You may notice that upkeep is draining my money, but don't worry, that will reset once the setup phase is over. You'd be able to see the V-Wings and T-3Bs if the spawns had given me a heavy factory. And that pretty much covers what tools you have to set up more Galactic Conquest than you'll ever be able to play through. If you'll excuse me, it looks like Kuwat Drive Yards is about to engage in some corporate warfare with the Trade Federation.